Good morning, class. So today we'll be beginning with the Iliad, and this is a part of your European classical literature paper, which is your compulsory paper. And um, so we have the Iliad, we have a couple of plays, Oedipus and Menachmus. We have some essays that are a part of your background readings, and we have this some poetry as well. So this is the Iliad. Now if you are familiar with this story, or if you're familiar with uh, epics as such, we have read epics in the Indian classical paper also. So anyway, all of you would be familiar with Mahabharata and Ramayana, right? The two Indian epics that most of us are familiar with. But we are looking at the epic in the Western tradition or in the European tradition. So this is by this author is Homer, and the book is called, the epic is called the Iliad, right? So let us now move to the first few facts about the epic. So this is European classical literature. Now by classical we mean ancient Greek and Roman literature, right? So this is written in about 8th century BC. Okay, so this is the epics of Homer are said to be the beginning of Greek literature, and this is written in 8th century BC. Events of the epic, the events that the epic detail, are events that happened in 13th century BC, right, which is around the late Bronze Age. So now the question comes, in fact, even if you have understood, or have taken your classes on Mahabharata, then you would know that we do not really know for sure whether there is one poet writing it, when does the event actually happen in history, how much of it is truth, how much of it is fiction, right? So because there are multiple stories, and why do these multiple stories exist? These multiple stories exist precisely because of the fact that these are a part of the oral poetic tradition, right? So these epics were not really written down, they were told, narrativized from one generation to another, right? That is how we understand the oral poetic tradition in which these epics were carried forward uh, through the years, through the ages rather, right? So now the question comes, who wrote the epic, right? So that is how we identify or raise this question about Homer as well. Now, Homer is believed to be the writer or the author of the epic called Iliad and another epic, which is the Odyssey, right? So, but then we are not really sure whether Homer was one person, or if he existed at one point in time, or there were multiple people writing the epic. Is he writing this epic as a part of a group? Is it one person? All of those things we are not really sure of, but we do not really get into that academic scholarly debate right now, because there are multiple perspectives about it, and considering the paucity of time that we have, we cannot really enter into that debate. So we tend to say that Homer is the composer, the author for the Iliad, right? So this is about the epic. Now we are constantly saying that this is an epic. What do we mean by an epic? That is what we'll be discussing, right? But just let us go through the other facts. So why does this question about Homer actually arise? Why do we think that this epic was not written by one person, or why does this entire scholarly debate come up? Right, so this is a 15,000 line long poem, right? So an epic, as you understand, even in the Indian tradition, if you've read, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata are also called as Kavya, right? So they are also written in poetry, so is the Iliad. But then with Iliad, the edition that we are reading, it is in prose rather than it being in a poetic translation. It is in prose translation. But it does not mean that the original epic is in prose. It is written in the form of a long epic poem. Okay. So Homer can be identified as the poet for the epic poem. Now, as I was saying, that the question comes up whether this is one person writing the epic, whether this is a group of people, how does it really work in the oral poetic tradition, right? These are some of the questions that lead to, this identification problem as far as the author is concerned. Now, the fact is that here we are really looking towards, the epic. How is it coming across to us? So, in terms of the epic, there is a unity in the poem, right? There is a comprehensive whole that we can identify in the poem. But there are also instances wherein the language of the epic, wherein the tone and the style of the epic differs, right? So that is why this entire question comes up, that if it is the same person writing, then, where should the style differ? Or if it is multiple people writing, how is there a unity in the poem as such? Right, so these questions come up, which are classified as the Homeric question. Homeric question basically meaning whether this is one person called Homer who writes the epic, or whether this is a group of poets who write the epic called Iliad. Now, the epic, the major fact, the major plot, and the unique event on which the epic is based on is the anger of this character called Achilles, right? So you might have heard of phrases or terms like Achilles' heel, right? So Achilles is a Greek mythological character who was the protagonist of Iliad, right? And the theme is about the wrath of Achilles, or the anger of Achilles, and this is in the context of the Trojan War between the Greeks and the Trojans. So the Greeks are also called as Achaeans, Denans, or Argives by Homer, and on the opposite side we have Trojans, right? So Achilles is a member of the Greeks, and we have the Trojans that they are fighting. Now, what does the Iliad mean? Iliad is a poem about this town called Ilium, or which is Troy. So, some of you might be familiar with this movie, right, by the same name, Troy, and it is kind of an adaptation of the epic, right? Not both are not exactly the same. So if you are watching the movie, in case you're familiar with the movie, or if you plan to watch the movie, there are differences, but it is sort of a good adaptation. Of course, some things are missing. That is why we cannot really take the movie in place of the book. But then it can be a worthwhile watch if you want to be familiar with the kind of, setup and setting, and visualize how does the war really look like, how does it take place. So what is the unique reason for this war? The reason is the abduction of Helen, the most beautiful woman on earth, wife of Menelaus, the king of Lacedaemon, by Paris, who is the son of King Priam of Troy, right? So the reason is the abduction of this woman, who's known as the most beautiful woman on earth. She is the wife of Menelaus, and she is abducted by Paris, who is the son of King Priam of Troy. So the reason, as you would know, as far as most of the epics, or as far as most of these stories of the classical times were concerned, the epics would generally talk about wars, right? So Ramayana, Mahabharata, Iliad, every epic is kind of talking about wars. And the reason for these wars, if you try to sort of trace a trajectory, then you would also understand that we are talking about, either abduction of women or probably some sort of a role or contribution of women as far as the wars are concerned. So wars happen around women as far as the epic traditions are concerned. Now of course we know that this is not really the reason behind the wars. There are larger political, economic, and other issues involved, but then we are really, we generally talk about the role of women. Of course, it has another patriarchal and side to it, but then we are really looking at the major reason that is given as a part of the epic is the abduction of Helen, and that is what we will be concerning ourselves with during our reading of the epic as well. So the war lasted for 10 years, ending with the fall of Troy. Now we must note that Iliad is actually talking about a very specific moment and a very specific theme from the entire situation of the Trojan War. The war lasted for about 10 years, right? And we are only talking about, the ninth year of the war, and we're only concerned with the anger of Achilles, right? So Homer chooses, he selects a very small event, a very small theme from the larger sort of war, and it is very, very specific. It is very particularized what Homer selects as his theme for the epic. So the poem deals with a few weeks in the ninth year of the 10 years war, and the Iliad ends with the funeral of Hector, the Trojan hero, and before the end of the war with the destruction of Troy. Right, so this is the major this is the major theme of Iliad. These are some of the facts that we can keep in mind. Now of course it is also said that this Trojan War really happened. There are some sort of evidences, historical, archaeological evidences to support it, but the exact details are not very clear, of course, because this is a long time ago. Okay, so we were talking about the epic, right? So the epic, according to Professor Maurice Baura, now you would find a lot of references to either CM Baura, uh, right, or Maurice Baura. So he talks at length about the epic, and he's a critic. He talks at length about the Iliad as well. So he says about the epic that the epic is a narrative of some length which deals with events which have a certain grandeur and importance and come from a life of action, especially of violent action such as war. So if you break down the statement, it is said that the epic is a narrative, right? So it is telling a story. Now the epic cannot be a really short story. It is a narrative of some length, right? So the epics are generally long stories which deal with events that have a certain grandeur and importance. So the epics talk about grand events, about major events that have a whole, that have an importance and come from a life of action, especially of violent action such as war, right? So as we were discussing, all the epics that we've been talking about, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Iliad, right? All of these have, at the background of all of these epics is the war, right? So they're talking about a life of action, they're talking about this major event of war. It gives a special pleasure because its event and persons enhance our belief in the worth of human achievement and in the dignity and nobility of man, right? So we said that epic poems are about important events, about grandeur, right? So these grand events inspire us, right? About the belief in the worth of human achievement, right? So as we'll go into the reading of the epic, we'll notice, how much of courage, how much of perseverance it takes to actually fight a 10-year long battle. What are the moments of human weakness? What are the moments of accomplishments? How do people see these various emotions throughout the battle, right? And we find that the belief in human achievement, right, especially if we talk about the Greek side of the battle, right? So there is already this prediction, already a foresight about how the battle will end. But even then, you see that the soldiers of the battle and everybody is trying their best. They are fighting it, despite knowing that what the result would be. Okay, so in that sense, it reinstates our belief in the nobility and dignity of man, right? So this is talking about Baura is talking about here what the epic does to its reader. So it instills in the reader the worth of human achievement and in the dignity and nobility of man. Especially this idea of dignity and nobility comes from this idea of grandeur, right? So the epics talk about grand themes. They do not talk about ordinary events. They talk about grand events of some importance that have probably changed the course of history in some way or the other. The events might be grand in their scale, right? So epics, if you really look at the epics that we are familiar with, they talk about the grand scale also, right? So they are not only talking about grand themes like the war, right, or historical events. They also talk about a grand scale of events, right? So even in the Iliad, you would see that you have that we have, Homer describing the extent of the army, the extent of the, power, and in the Mahabharata also you have glimpses of those things, right? So how grand was the tribe of the Kauravas, how grand was the tribe of the Pandavas, how grand is how grand are the Greeks, how grand is the control or the tribe of the Trojans, right? So all of this is there as a part of the epic. So it is talking about major events, it is talking about grand events, both in theme and in the scale of that event. So from this definition, now it follows that an epic is a long narrative poem, right? So epic is narrativizing things, right? They are really reporting events, right? They are telling us a story. Okay, so the epic is a narrative poem. It is a long poem dealing with grand and serious subjects, right? So we already said that it talks about grand events and events that are of some importance. So it talks about serious subjects like war, Then the events originate from heroic action, right? This heroic action, this heroism in the epic is what leads to this grandeur, is what leads to this belief in human achievement, nobility, dignity, right? So the events originate from heroic action. Now, participation in war or going to a battle is something heroic, right? So the epics originate from that kind of a heroic action. Something extraordinary, something big, something large that has happened is going to be the subject of an epic. The action center on a heroic figure, right? So the action of the epic, the plot of the epic also centers on this heroic figure, right? So, for example, in the Iliad, we have Achilles. Now, Achilles, of course, we are talking about the wrath of Achilles or the anger of Achilles, but Achilles is actually a very successful warrior, right? And it is his heroic actions, it is his bravery, his heroism that is actually a cause for this epic, right? So the epic is largely talking about when Achilles withdraws from battle and how the Greeks suffer as a result of that, right? So of course we understand from that idea that how heroic is the figure of Achilles, right? Who is our protagonist. Of course, there are multiple characters in the epic, as we already said, that, it is grand in scale also. So you would have probably some time actually figuring out which characters are there, who plays what role. Of course, again, we are talking about the Greek tradition. So some of us would not be very much familiar with it, but I hope that during the course of the classes and during the course of your reading and probably looking at the Greek tradition, you would be more and more familiarized with the Greek ethos in particular, and the characters and everybody. And of course, another thing that I would want to say is that there are similarities, right? On the risk of sounding probably um, banal, but I would still like to make the statement that so that this becomes more familiar to you, that there are some sort of similarities between how we have read the Indian classical epics and how we can read the European classical epics, right? Be it the portrait of the gods, so there are some sort of similarities. Heroism is something that is a part in both the traditions, right? Then, this long narrative talking about these grand themes, this is there as far as the epic tradition itself is concerned, right? Of course, the worldview, the perspectives might differ. The tradition in particular might differ, right? But you can actually connect, you can make connections between both in terms of your own understanding, and that would help you to kind of, remember, comprehend things on a more familiar basis, right? Of course, there are many adaptations. There are many, even throughout when when you've enrolled yourselves as literature students, and you'd be, of course, doing other papers after you finish your classical papers in the first semester. Right in the second semester, you'd be doing, other papers, and there also you would find the influence of these epics, these classical figures, and Greek and Roman mythology, especially, in some periods like the Renaissance. So there would be constant allusions, constant references. Therefore, it is better that we, familiarize ourselves with the Greek ethos, the Greek world, the classical figures, Greek mythology, etc. So to do that, either you can really, probably watch these things visually as well, so that, probably that visual memory would also help you to retain and remember things. Or you can probably relate within the, within the two traditions, so that for your own understanding, you find it more interesting, you can relate to it, and of course coming right from school into into reading these epics and long texts kind of becomes a sort of difficult thing to do, but please take it slowly and you'll be probably able to navigate through the text. Okay. So the epic enhances our belief in the possibilities of man. It has a wide range of its themes, from heavens to the lower world, and over an enormous mass of traditional knowledge. Right. So this is what we find in the epic, that it talks about a large scale as well. Right. So this wide range of theme, from the heavens to the lower world, from heaven to hell, and over an enormous mass of traditional knowledge, right? So even with the Iliad, why can Homer begin, or can only specifically talk about um, the anger of Achilles? Because his readers are already familiar with the Trojan War. They're already familiar what happened there, right? So it is safe to assume for Homer that he can pick an instance right in the ninth year of the 10 Years' War, and people would know what is the history, what is the background of the epic, really, right? So this is the traditional knowledge that Homer relies on, and this is really something talking about a very long period of time in history, right? So there is enormous mass of traditional knowledge, not only in terms of the war per se or the historical event per se, but also in terms of understanding the ethos or the culture of that particular setup of that particular area, right? So not only is Homer talking about the war per se, but he would also make constant references to the kind of society that people live in, right? So we would understand from there that this the economy is agricultural, right? How do all these people live? What do they do? We get a sense of that world as well. So the epic is not only about the war; it also gives us glimpses into the society, gives us glimpses into the tradition, the culture of those people as well, right? So this is something that we need to keep in mind as literature students, that of course every text that is written, every text that we encounter is actually about the social, historical, political context that it is coming from, right? So this is also true for the epics of the classical time. They are not devoid of any historical, political, or economical context that they were written in, or they have been a part of. So some sort of background information now about the epic. Before we'll move on to the summary of the epic book by book, it contains 24 books, right? So before we do that, we'll discuss the background. I'll discuss some of the other facts and important points. So, I'll take a short um, question answer session. If you have any questions, if you're unclear about whatever we've discussed, I'll just go to the message box. You can write down your questions in the message box before we begin the summary of the epic. So the background of the Iliad is the battle between the Greeks and the Trojans over the abduction of Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Lacedaemon, Sparta. Myth tells us that at the wedding of Thetis and Peleus, right? So Cetis is actually the mother of Achilles. Eris, the goddess of discord, was not invited and turned away when she appeared. Feeling angry and humiliated, she threw a golden apple with the inscription to the fairest among the guests. Three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, fought over it. Ultimately, they went to Paris, son of Priam, the king of Troy, to settle the dispute. He was working as a shepherd at Mount Ida. The goddesses promised him different things, but he was tempted by Aphrodite's offer of the fairest woman as his prize. He gave the apple to Aphrodite. He went to Sparta and, with the help of Aphrodite, carried off Helen to Troy. The Greeks invaded Troy to regain Helen. Right? So, this is the basic background, this is the basic myth on which the story is based. So it happens so that it is a part of the that one of these goddesses is not invited to the wedding of Thetis and Peleus, and therefore she throws a golden apple, and as a result of that, Helen is uh, demanded as the prize, as the most fairest of all, and then finally, she's taken off. Now, you might be familiar with some of these names, right? So, we already talked about who is Menelaus, and talking about these three goddesses, Hera is the wife of Zeus, there is Athena, and there is Aphrodite. Right? So Athena and Aphrodite are again goddesses. Hera is the wife of Zeus, who's the most powerful of the Greek gods, who presides over the over Mount Olympus, where all the gods live. So the battle lasted for 10 years and ended with the defeat of Troy. Many legends and myths are woven around this original story. The Iliad only narrates a few episodes in this long saga of the war of Troy. So that is what we've already said, that it talks about the ninth year when Achilles is withdrawn from the battle, and when we see that Achilles uh, eventually returns to battle and kills Hector, and those sort of events take place. So the Trojan War did actually take place. The real cause, though, might not have been the abduction of Helen, right? So that is what we were trying to say, that the real cause of the battle might not be the abduction of Helen per se, right? So she's made into that cause, but it is said that the conflicting trading interests perhaps caused the war. So the trading interests of the Greeks and the Trojans perhaps caused the war, but the entire blame, according to the myth, is blamed on Helen. So this prosaic reason, this very base economical reason, was abandoned in favor of the more romantic one, which is about who owns Helen, who possesses Helen, who is going to be the husband and going to be the possessor of Helen, who is the most beautiful woman. Okay. So I hope you are clear with the things that we've discussed so far, and now we are moving to the beginning of Iliad. So Homer opens the Iliad with an invocation to the goddess, the muse, who personifies the inspiration for epic poetry. Now there are 9 muses in the epic tradition, in the Greek tradition, and we see that Homer begins his epic with an invocation to the goddess. Right. So in the classical times, as you might be aware, the poets really talk about some uh, gods and goddesses who help them write the epic, right? Of course, an epic is a daunting task, meaning that it is a long long narrative. It talks about these serious subjects, right? And they also talk about those subjects in great specificities. Therefore, in terms of the epic representing, if the epic represents anything of history or of a major event, then it is a daunting task to write such a long story about it, right? So the writer, the poet, often um, asks for help, right? For inspiration, for help. And this Homer does with an invocation, with a prayer, with, calling the goddesses, the muse, who personifies the inspiration for epic poetry. So the muses were the 9 beautiful daughters of Zeus and uh, Mnemosyne, which is memory. They were divinities according to Greek mythology, inspiring poetry, science, and arts. Right. So everything of the creative field, of the arts, poetry, and sciences was actually uh, given by, or the inspiration came from, the goddesses or the 9 muses. So they are actually understood as divinities, right? They're actually understood as divine. So each muse presides over one particular field. So every muse, we said that there are 9 muses and they all have different fields that they preside on. So for example, for poetry, the for epic poetry, the muse is called Calliope, right? Then the muses provided both a sense of inspiration to the Greek bards or the Greek poets, and also were a source of knowledge for them, right? So if you read the Iliad, you would see how much of a detail is given as far as the battle is there. So he talks about the details of the ships. He talks about the warriors, weapons, etc. In much detail, right? So the muses help not only provide inspiration to continue to inspire the poet to write the epic, but also are a source of knowledge for them. So the muses inspire, they also provide knowledge regarding the epic that the writer is supposed to write, that the poet is supposed to write. Therefore, at the beginning of the epic itself, there is an invocation to the muses or the invocation to the goddess that is made. For Homer, his own personality or opinion is of no significance. Right? So another thing that we kind of know from our reading of, probably the other epics, is that um, they are said to be, an objective sort of report of events that happened. So the author's own personality, he's just reporting events. So the poet, his personality, all of that is said not to be important in the writing of the epic, right? So the muse, the goddess, and they're detailing historical events, they're detailing events that are already known to people. So they do not see that as that their personality or their opinion enters the sphere of the epic, right? So with regard to Iliad, with regard to Homer, it is also said that, the Iliad is probably a kind of a third person narrative wherein Homer has reported events, right? But then, of course, that can be challenged because, as we see, that Homer chooses a very specific idea, a very specific theme, a very specific period. He selects how to represent characters, what importance to give to them. So objectivity is probably questionable, but in terms of providing the fact of the facts of the epic, of course, the source of knowledge, the bards say that they have been the muses. The beginning of the poem, from the conflict between Agamemnon and Achilles, implies that the foregoing legend was known to the audience, right? So as we said that the epic kind of begins in the end, during the end of the war, like in the 9th year of the 10 years war. So we can really say that the history of the war is actually known to the readers, right? So that is why the poet can begin at one point towards the end of the battle, right? So that means that the people are, the readers are really familiar with the other 8 years of war already, which is why they can Homer can directly speak about the 9th year of the war, and he can begin with the conflict between Agamemnon and Achilles, which is towards the beginning of the Iliad. So first of all, of course, we have the invocation, and then we have the conflict between Agamemnon and Achilles, that is talked about as the real first event in the story. So just the basic outline of the epic. The story of the Iliad begins with the wrath of Achilles, his quarrel with Agamemnon, and withdrawal from the battle. The battle goes on without Achilles, and the Greeks suffer heavy losses. The Olympian gods, the Greek gods that we've been talking about, take sides in the battle, but Achilles rejoins the battle only after the death of Patroclus, his dear friend. He finally kills Hector, who had killed Patroclus, but his spirit of revenge is not assuaged. He drags Hector's body around, aiming to feed dogs upon it. The gods are displeased with this treatment of the dead. Zeus sends a word to desist, and Hector's father, Priam, comes as a suppliant to Achilles, requesting him for Hector's body to be given a proper burial. In the end, Achilles regains his humanity and repents. He pities Priam and surrenders the body of Hector for burial. Now, in many of the versions of the story, right, which are adaptations of the Iliad, um, we might see, the death of Achilles or something of that kind, but that is not really shown in the Iliad per se. In the Iliad, the story ends with uh, Achilles being generous finally with Priam and giving the body of Hector, who is his son, for proper burial, right? So you can see that it is because of his anger, which has happened, as a result of this quarrel with Agamemnon, that Achilles withdraws from the battle. And then when finally one of his dear comrades and friend Patroclus is killed, Achilles returns to the battle to avenge the death of Patroclus. And he not only avenges Patroclus's death, but he also, uh, you know, mistreats the body of Hector. And his mistreatment is actually very, very cruel. And this also leads the gods to be displeased. Now, just you would be thinking what is about these gods, and how is the story relating to the gods, and why do we have the mention of gods everywhere? So gods in this tradition, in the Greek European classical tradition, are not really, there residing at the Mount Olympus and just watching over the events. They are very much participants, and they very much take sides, influence what is happening on Earth, right? So even, as far as the Greek gods are concerned, they have children with the mortals, right? As we said that Achilles is the child of a goddess and a mortal, right, and a man. So the role of the gods in the battle is much. They can turn the face of the battle, and they can constantly influence people. They can constantly influence the results of the battle, decide who fights whom and what happens. All of that is happening in the battle itself. So the gods are displeased at Achilles' treatment of Hector's body, because in Greek tradition, again, it is very important, right? So Greeks place much value in how the dead are treated, right? So the dead bodies, especially people who had, come for a battle, who had died during a battle, deserve a proper burial, right? So Achilles' treatment of Hector's body, who's a great warrior himself. So Achilles' treatment of Hector's dead body actually upsets the gods, and therefore, finally you see that Priam is uh, coming to Achilles and requesting that there should be a proper burial given to the dead body of Hector. Initially, Achilles had not been very willing for it, and we saw the mistreatment time and again. But then he understands, he kind of gets rid of his anger towards Hector, and he regains his humanity and gives the body for a proper burial, right? So this is the basic outline, the basic plot for the story. Now we are moving on to some of the characters, right? After we go through these characters, we'll be coming to the summary, and before we come to the summary, I think it will be about 11, and then I'll, take your questions, and before we move on to the summary per se. So Greeks, as we said, that they are either called as Achaeans or Argives or the Danans. So Achilles, he's the son of the military man Peleus and the sea nymph or the sea goddess Cetus, the most powerful warrior in the Iliad. Achilles commands the Myrmidons, the soldiers from his homeland of Phthia in Greece. Proud and headstrong, he takes offense easily and reacts with blistering indignation when he perceives that his honor has been slighted. Achilles' wrath at Agamemnon for taking his war prize, the maiden Briseis, forms the main subject of Iliad. Now, what is this event? What is happening here? Achilles, we've understood who's Achilles, right? He's also the commander of Myrmidons, and he takes, he gets offended easily, right? So honor, right? Honor, which is also called as kleos in the Greek world, is of importance, is of extreme importance to the warrior. And Agamemnon, who takes away, um, Achilles' war prize. Now, the war prize, talking about the war prize here, it is the maiden, it is the woman, young woman receives, right? So when these soldiers, when these warriors used to plunder and loot and win over a territory, they would take also the women of that territory as a prize, as their war prize, right? So it was called as the booty that they would, take away from the battle as their war prizes. And Agamemnon is, of course, greater. He's the ruler, right? And Agamemnon's quarrel with Achilles actually begins over this war prize, right? So there is a girl called Chrysis, we'll be talking about her, and there is a girl called Briseis, who are both war prizes, and the quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon happens over the war prizes. Now, it is not on the subject of women per se, right? It is not for their love for those women that they're fighting, but it is actually about the question of honor, that who is the greater warrior, who deserves the better prize. That is what is, what is the subject of the quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon. So Agamemnon, who is the king of Mycenae and the leader of the Achaean army, brother of King Menelaus of Sparta, right? So Menelaus is the king, and Agamemnon is his brother, and Menelaus is the king of Sparta, while Agamemnon is the king of Mycenae. Arrogant and often selfish, Agamemnon provides the Achaeans with strong but sometimes reckless and self-serving leadership. Right. So these, if you observe Achilles and Agamemnon, they have, they're both uh, in that sense sometimes reckless. Like Achilles, he lacks consideration and forethought. Most saliently, his tactless appropriation of Achilles' war prize, the maiden Briseis, creates a crisis for the Achaeans when Achilles, insulted, withdraws from the war. Right? So it is Achilles who feels insulted by Agamemnon, and therefore he returns from the or withdraws from the war. Then we have Patroclus, who's the beloved friend of Achilles. And Patroclus grew up alongside the great warrior in Thea, right, which is the homeland of Achilles, under the guardianship of Peleus, who's the father of Achilles, devoted to both Achilles and the Achaean cause. Um, Patroclus stands by the enraged Achilles, but also dons Achilles' terrifying armor in an attempt to hold the Trojans back. Right. So when Achilles has withdrawn from the battle, and he did not also let Patroclus fight for a long time. Right. So as Patroclus is his dearest friend, Achilles also stopped Patroclus from fighting the battle. But at one point, finally, when the Greeks are suffering much, he kind of allows Patroclus to fight, and Patroclus takes the armor of Achilles to fight the battle, and we see that this results into the in that battle, then Patroclus dies, and Achilles comes back to war to avenge the death of Patroclus. Right. So this is, these are fun, like the few initial characters of the Greeks. Now Odysseus, who is again a fine warrior and the cleverest of Achaean commanders, along with Nestor, Odysseus is one of the Achaeans' two best public speakers, right? So he is not only a warrior, but he's also a good public speaker. He helps mediate between Agamemnon and Achilles during their quarrel and often prevents them from making rash decisions, right? So Odysseus is a warrior. He's Nestor is also, this person who is a commander, who's this speaker who, helps make peace between warring parties. So along with Nestor, Odysseus is the one who does that job. Diomedes, he is the youngest of the Achaean commanders. Diomedes is bold and sometimes proves impetuous, right? So you see that there are mostly two kinds of characters that are given here. Either they're impetuous, or they are, circumspect, and they take their time making decisions, and they kind of take them more sensibly. So after Achilles withdraws from combat, Athena inspires Diomedes with such courage that he actually wounds two gods, Aphrodite and Ares, right? So Diomedes becomes such a great warrior. Then Achilles withdraws from battle. Diomedes is the one who takes over, even to the extent of injuring two gods. Great Ajax, he's an Achaean commander again, and he's the second mightiest Achaean warrior after Achilles. His extraordinary size and strength help him to wound Hector twice by hitting him with boulders. He often fights alongside Little Ajax. Great Ajax and Little Ajax are both brothers, and the pair is frequently referred to as the Aeantis. Little Ajax, he's again an Achaean commander. He is the second son of Oileus, to be distinguished from great Ajax, the son of Telamon. He often fights along the great Ajax, whose stature and strength complement little Ajax's small size and swift speed. Right. So great Ajax is big and he is very powerful. Little Ajax is swift and small. So the two together are sometimes called as the Aegis. Um, then we have Nestor, who's the king of Pylos and oldest Achaean commander. And he, as we said, is a good orator who helps make peace between warring parties. Then Menelaus, who's the king of Sparta, we've already talked about him. He's the younger brother of Agamemnon, and his wife is the one who's captured by Paris. Now Idomeneus, he's the king of Crete and respected commander. Macon is another healer. Calchas is another important soothsayer, right? So these people, now in the Greek tradition, we have oracles, predictions, people who foretell what will happen in the future, right? So this is, people who can tell what happens in the future in terms of what they've heard via the oracle. They are given much importance by the Greeks and by, of course, the you would also see that in other books that you would be reading, right? For example, Oedipus also has a great emphasis on the oracle, right? So he is an important soothsayer, and his identification of the cause of the plague ravaging the Achaean army in Book 1 leads inadvertently to the rift between Agamemnon and Achilles that occupies the first 19 books of the Iliad. Right? So the quarrel between Agamemnon and Achilles is responsible for Achilles' withdrawal from the battle, and this continues for the first 19 books of the Iliad. Peleus, we already said that Peleus is Achilles' father. He's the grandson of Zeus, and although his name often appears in the epic, Peleus never appears in person. Priam powerfully invokes the memory of Peleus when he convinces Achilles to return Hector's corpse to the Trojans. Then we have Phoenix, who is a kindly old warrior, and he is the one who helped raise Achilles. And then we also already talked about who are the Myrmidons. Then that was as far as the Greek army was concerned. We have the Trojan army now. Hector, we've been talking about Hector. Hector is the son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba. Hector is the most mighty warrior in the Trojan army. He mirrors Achilles in some of his flaws, but his bloodlust is not so great as that of Achilles, right? So Achilles is the one who is more violent. Hector is not. Hector in his approach seems to be more noble as far as, the portrait in the Iliad is concerned. He's devoted to his wife Andromache and son Astyanax, but resents his brother Paris for bringing war upon their family and city. Right? So Hector and Paris are both brothers, and Hector, although is fighting the war, he's fighting for honor of his place, of himself, right? But he does not like the fact that so many people are suffering because of the war, because of Paris, right? And Paris, as we would know, is kind of self-centered and doesn't really care about the army, which actually is something that Hector dislikes. So Priam is the king of Troy and the husband of Hecuba. Priam is the father of 50 Trojan warriors, including Hector and Paris. Though too old to fight, he has earned the respect of both the Trojans and the Achaeans by the virtue of his level-headed, wise, and benevolent rule. He treats Helen kindly, though he laments the war that her beauty has sparked. Right? So Hector and Priam are both, not really happy with the war that is going on. Hecuba, we already said, is the wife of Priam, the mother of Hector and Paris. Paris, he is the son of Priam and Hecuba and the brother of Hector, right? So he has abducted the beautiful Helen, who's the wife of Menelaus, and sparked the Trojan War. So he prefers to sit in his room making love to Helen while others fight for him, thus earning both Hector's and Helen's scorn. Right? So this is why Paris is scorned by Hector, that he does not really fight. He at one point in time there is a war, there is a individual sort of battle that is individual fight that is sought to happen between Paris and the other party, right? The one of the Greek soldiers. So what happens is that Paris withdraws, right? Seeing the strength of the warrior, he withdraws. So you see that Paris is often, somebody who does not act very nobly or honorably as far as his conduct during the war is concerned. Helen, who is reputed to be the most beautiful woman in the ancient world, Helen was stolen from her husband Menelaus and taken to Troy by Paris. Right, so I think now you're sort of getting familiar with the characters. Aeneas, who was a Trojan nobleman, the son of Aphrodite and a mighty warrior. The Romans believed that Aeneas later founded their city. Andromache is Hector's loving wife, and Astyanax is Hector and Andromache's son. Polydamas is a young Trojan commander. He is a foil character for Hector, providing cool-headed and proving cool-headed and prudent when Hector charges ahead. He gives Trojan sound advice, but Hector seldom acts in it. Glaucus, who is another powerful Trojan warrior, he fights a duel with Diomedes, whom we said is, one of the young mighty warriors on the Greek side. The men's exchange of armor after they realize that their families are friends illustrates the value that ancients placed on kinship and camaraderie, right? So, although they are warring from two different parties, or they are from opposite parties, when they realize that they have a history of familial friendship, they they exchange their armor. So this tells us that Greeks placed a lot of importance on um, their friendships as much as their warring interests. Then we have Agenor, who's a Trojan warrior who attempts to fight Achilles in Book 21. Agenor delays Achilles long enough for the Trojan army to flee inside of Troy's walls. Dolon is a Trojan sent to spy on the Achaean camp in Book 10. Pandarus is a Trojan archer, and his shot at Menelaus in Book 4 breaks the temporary truce between the two sides. Antenor is a Trojan nobleman, advisor to King Priam and the father of many Trojan warriors. He argues that Helen should be returned to Menelaus in order to end the war, but Paris refuses to give her up. Sarpedon is one of Zeus's sons. His fate seems to be intertwined with the gods' quibbles, right? Their squabbles, their little fights, calling attention to the unclear nature of the gods' relationship to fate. Chryses is the daughter of this priest of Apollo in the Trojan allied town, and Chryses and Briseis are both, people or young women who are a subject of, quarrel between Agamemnon and Achilles. So when Agamemnon is forced to return Chryses to her father, he appropriates Briseis as a compensation, sparking Achilles' great rage. Then we have the Greek gods and goddesses, right? So a pictorial sort of representation for the Greek gods and goddesses. So Zeus, who's the king of gods and the husband of Hera, he claims neutrality in the mortals' conflict and often tries to keep other gods from participating in it. Hera, who's the wife of Zeus, she is a headstrong, conniving woman. She often goes to Zeus in matters of on which they disagree. Right, so you would find these Greek gods and goddesses and references to them even while you're reading the other plays, poems, etc. Right, for example, in Metamorphoses or in Oedipus, etc., you'll constantly find these references. Then Athena, who's the goddess of wisdom and purposeful battle, womanly arts. She's also Zeus's daughter. So she, like Hera, passionately hates the Trojans. So Hera and Athena often gang up against the Trojans. Then Cetus, who is, of course, Cetus we've discussed. Apollo is the sun god, and he's the son of Zeus, and twin brother of goddess Artemis. Apollo is the goddess sun. Then Aphrodite, who's the goddess of love. Right. So she supports and Paris and Trojans, unlike Athena and Hera. Then Poseidon, who's the brother of Zeus and the god of the sea, right? He holds a long-standing grudge against the Trojans because they never paid him for helping him to build their city. He therefore supports the Achaeans or the Greeks in the war. Hephaestus, who is the god of fire and the husband of Aphrodite. Hephaestus is the god's metalsmith and is known as the lame or the cripple god. Right? So he helps the Achaeans by forging a new armor for Achilles and by rescuing Achilles during a fight with the river god. Then Artemis was the god of hunt, daughter of Zeus, twin sister of Apollo. She supports the Trojans. Ares, he's the god of war and lover of Aphrodite. He again supports the Trojans. Hermes is the messenger of the gods. Iris is Zeus's messengers. Right, so now I'll be quickly moving on to your questions before we proceed with the summary. Achaeans and Greeks, as we said, are the same. They are also called as the Argives and the Danans, right? These are all the names for the Greeks. No, there is no consent really on the side of Helen as as far as her abduction. This is all maneuvered by the gods. So even if there is, even if there is a consent, it is not a very willing consent, right? They have to, kind of agree to what the gods demand out of them. Okay, a lot of you were asking about the book, so I'll just, I'll just talk about that. Iliad is talking about a battle between the Greeks and the Trojans, not really between individual characters. So Achilles and Hector represent both Achilles represents the Greek side and Trojans side is represented by Hector. Right. So of course we are talking about these two major characters who change the course of the book. Right. That in that way, of course, you can say that it is also talking about the battle between Achilles and Hector, but that is not the only battle, and they are just representatives of these kings, right? So when we read the Iliad, you get a sense that Achilles and Achilles also many a times complains that why should we fight the battle for you, right? It is about it is about the kings and the rulers who are deciding what they want. They are fighting over a woman, right? What do I gain out of it? What is my prerogative in fighting this war, right? So that kind of a complaint also comes up by the soldiers. When we go through the narrative, when we go through the book, you would understand that, it is not really the soldiers' commitment or, they're of course fighting their own battle for glory or for material possessions, but that is also and against this backdrop of that they have nothing to gain, it is the rulers who are fighting over trivial matters or for matters important to them, whatever. But these things could have been sorted out. As for all the wars that happened, really, um, just like all the wars that happened, really, we see that, this war is also being held for something that the rulers decide, not really, of course, the participation of the warriors and the soldiers is important, but they are kind of sacrificed in the war that the rulers decide on. Wrath is anger. Again. No, you need not read about the earlier years of this war. What happens in the early years is that for these, preceding 8 to 9 years, the Greeks really do not enter the space, but they've won some, a lot of villages and towns. They've gathered a lot of wealth and won a lot of, booty from there, from the Trojan side. But this is the major event in the war that we are looking at, and we are only concerned with the Iliad. So we need not read about the entire Trojan War. We can only, focus our attention to what happens in the Iliad. Okay, I already kind of explained that epic enhances our belief in the possibilities of man in terms of the fact that epic is talking about these grand heroic men, right? This grand heroic figure who will fight or who will, face these extraordinary circumstances. So when we look at a person like Hector, or when we look at a person like Achilles, what do we learn, right? Whenever you read a book, right? Whenever you would have read novels or stories or poems, right? When you talk about characters like, for example, Ram, right, or Arjun, or probably Achilles or Hector, what do you gain from their life? There is something to gain from their life, right? Even Arjun's dilemma at the beginning of the war, that is the Bhagavad Gita that comes from that instance, right? So what is really happening there? It is about that the epic will talk about extraordinary strength that people have shown in moments of strife, right? So for Achilles, for Hector also, right? Hector is fighting the war for a stupid sort of thing that his brother is doing. And then his brother is absolutely unwilling to relent. He's also unwilling to fight the war, right? But he's fighting for his people. He's fighting for his country, despite everything, right? Then Achilles also, he is the greatest of soldiers. Whom does he fight for? He returns to the battle to avenge the death of his dearest friend, right? He had completely denied going to battle, but then to avenge the death of his dearest friend, he returns to the battle, right? Despite whatever insult he's been feeling and whatever has happened with him, all of that he gives up to avenge the death of his friend, right? So that kind of a heroic deed reinstates our belief in humanity, in relationships, in probably people's strength, in the possibilities of, human potential. That is what we mean by that statement. What kind of a warrior is Hector? Hector is, a noble sort of warrior in major parts of the book. Of course, as far as the characterization of all of these characters is concerned, what he's done is, what Homer has done is that there is not a complete black and white character, right? So people have their flaws and people have their good points as well. So Hector is a noble warrior. At times he is also skeptical of fighting the battle, but most of the times he is shown to be, being noble, being very much heroic and a great fighter as far as the battle is concerned. Book 4, Book 11, as we said, the Iliad is divided into 24 books, and we'll be coming to the summary of each of these books, when we finish our question answer session. Of course, we'll come to what is Troy, what is the war, that we'll come to when we'll discuss the story. Okay. Role of women in the war. So women do not participate in the war as such. They do not go to the battleground to fight the war, but they are participants in the sense that, sometimes, for example, if you really, if we read through the book, we'll realize that they make these offerings, they pray to the gods and goddesses, right? But they do not participate in the war. So their contribution is in terms of, asking or making these contributions in terms of praying to the gods, but not really at the battlefield itself. Okay. Theme of Iliad is about Achilles' anger. I'll forward the PPT to you. Central idea again is about, this theme of anger of Achilles. Okay. Why is it the unique event? It is anger of Achilles is the unique event in the war because of the fact that it is the changing point in the war, right? When Achilles is there, right, for all the time that Achilles is there, Greeks are, on this strong footing. When Achilles withdraws, Greeks suffer huge losses, right? So that is that changing turning point, which is why it is called as this, event. Okay, let me show you guys. The book that you are supposed to do is this one, right? This is a sort of a thick book, if you can probably see it, right? It is the Iliad. The translation that is prescribed is EV Reviews translation. Of course, you have the study material uploaded for the Iliad on the website, on SWL website. You can refer to your study material. You can, of course, this is your primary text. You have to read the book, the Iliad as well. Your book is not, of course, given to you in your study material. The epic, you will need to probably download a copy of it or, buy it from the market and read. This translation, this edition is prescribed because this translation contains introduction, annotations, and everything. So this is one of the good translations that is available. Okay, so this is the one as far as the book goes. Now, as far as the exam questions are concerned, of course, we'll talk about them during, probably in our last class. We have 6 hours for this novel, sorry, for this epic. And, today I am kind of trying to introduce you to the epic, to the kind of epic structure and the summary so that you have a general idea. And then, of course, we'll talk about the exam questions and everything as well. And for the exam questions, if I tell you a very general sort of tip, hint, what you can do is that this book has been in the university syllabus for quite some time. So you can you can probably even Google, questions on Iliad, and you can see what kind of questions that are those that come up in with regard to the book. But of course, I hope that during our discussions on the book, most of these questions would anyway be clear and you would not require, extra help, extra material apart from what we will be doing apart from your study material and probably your introduction to the book. Of course, much material is available online as well, and we have a WhatsApp group, I think, to which I was added this morning. So if you need more material, I can forward some material to that group as well. Okay, so do not worry about the book. I'll forward the name here, and it is also prescribed. The edition and everything is given to you in your syllabus as well. You can refer to your syllabus and look at the edition that you've been prescribed, right? So for the book, you need not worry about all of that, right? So Hector was a kind of a good person, somebody said, and in comparison to Achilles, and in terms of how Hector was worried about his people, right? So that kind of a difference emerges as far as the Iliad is concerned, that Hector is constantly worried about his people, his tender side in terms of what happens to his wife, what happens to his son, what happens to his mother after his death, that is also shown, right? So that tender noble side of Hector in comparison to the extreme wrath of Achilles, or the anger of Achilles, is also shown to us. I'll send the PPT also, this PPT, to you guys on the group, right? Or probably upload it on Teams and you can access it here. Yeah. So somebody is asking about this question. The Iliad has been called from the beginning to an end a poem of death, yet one could also argue that from the beginning to the end that this is a poem about life, right? So poem about death. Why is it the poem about death? Because it is focusing on the war and the calamities of the war, the deaths and devastation that the war causes. But it is also a poem about life, because when you would read the Iliad, you would find that it is talking about very simple lives of people there, right? The agricultural setup, how people are invested in their familial life, their family life, their agricultural home life, how they are absolutely happy in that setup as well, and how they kind of yearn, even the soldiers yearn to go back to their families and get rid of that war. So it is both a poem about the deaths in the war, the foretold deaths of some characters also, but also a poem that talks about uh, the the simple facts of life, the beautiful feelings that are a part of our everyday life as well. So both of these aspects are there in the book, and we see that there is a humanizing effect also in the way that Homer talks about the war. You can find the PPT. I'll upload it on the team that we have. I guess there is a team group Microsoft Teams that is made for us, and you can access the PPT from there. Rather than probably if you're not on the WhatsApp group, also you can access the PPT from Microsoft Teams also. The main cause of the war is, as we said, the abduction of Helen, right? Of course, this war really happened, Trojan War. There are evidences to the war. Okay. I cannot give you the original book PPT. I do not have it. I cannot also add you to the WhatsApp group. There is some admin to the WhatsApp group. Probably they can add you in. Like any other important questions. Why did Homer choose Achilles to be hero from many special characters in the war? Okay, interesting question. So, Achilles is one of the great warriors, right? In fact, he is the warrior that overpowers all others as far as the Greek side is concerned, right? And again, as I said, that this is the turning point. So Homer is choosing a very specific, interesting incident to talk of in the epic. Of course, the epic, for example, probably, if you can think of any other stories or any other epic, you would also realize that every story has a specific way or one particular event that it can talk about at length, right? There is a main plot to every story. So why does he choose Achilles as the main character? Because it defines that changing moment, right, in the plot of the Trojan War. This is where things set start to get really nasty for the Greeks, right? And then Achilles's uh, whole journey, if you also think of it in terms of character or what we can learn from Achilles, right? So Achilles' journey from this angry sort of person who only is talking about his own honor, uncaring of what happens to his men in the Greek army, to this humanizing journey where he avenges his friend's death. But then again, in that anger, he mutilates Hector's body completely, to that final fact wherein, of course, when we come to the story, we already know that Thetis tells Achilles that if he goes and participates in the war, that prediction has already been made about him. That either he can choose to earn honor from fighting the war, from fighting the battle, or he can go on to have a long, prosperous, simple life, simple domestic life. So Achilles, as a warrior, chooses honor and a shorter life rather than going to, rather than leading a happy, prosperous, familial, domestic life, right? So if you look at that, this is the hero, right? Special characters are many, right? So probably he could have talked about Hector also, but he could not talk about Hector unless and until he talked about Achilles, right? So of course, Achilles is one of the prime figures who causes this turning point from in the narrative, which is why I think Homer chooses Achilles as the main character for what it does with the characterization, for what impact he has on the plot, for what his story can inspire in the readers. That is why Achilles is chosen as the main character. Okay. So most of you who are asking about the WhatsApp group or this Teams group. Teams, you can, while you would be looking at the screen, guys, or when you will actually look at your Teams app, you will have a small icon, Teams. On you have 3 people or you have a group of people, and on below that icon you can see Teams written. So you can click on that. You will be redirected to your group, your team, and we'll be uploading the PPT there, and you can access that PPT from there. Or if you see a tab called Files, you can probably also see your PPT there. Iliad is this town or this place called Ilium, meaning Troy. Homer makes distinctions between Achaeans and Trojans. Of course, Achaeans is the Greek side. Their opposite parties were fighting this battle. Yeah, the turning point is when Achilles decides to return to the battle, right? First he withdraws from the battle and then he returns to the battle, actually avenging his death, killing Hector and turning the face of the entire battle. No, the first 8 years of the war you need not read about. I've already mentioned that. Iliad is written by Homer, if some of you are asking that. Okay. The person who has made this WhatsApp group, the admin of the group, if you're in class, please address these queries. Please, add up people, note down their numbers if they're, giving their numbers here, or otherwise probably post it in your Teams group, the link for your WhatsApp group, so that other people can also join in. The role of gods, we'll be talking about the role of gods in great detail, right? But the gods, as we said, they have, they kind of influence people, they change the course of the war, they favor some people, and they take forms they take other forms to actually uh, act like somebody else. And okay, so probably, to give you just a simple sort of a reference, the role that kind of Narad Muni, Indradev, these kind of figures have, right? So they have very sort of manipulative roles, right? And then there are other gods that probably go under their influence, come under their influence, and they kind of shift the course of people's destiny, right? So that kind of a thing also happens here. But here the gods can also descend to battle, right? In the very first screen, if you saw my first screen of the PPT, it shows gods descending to battle, right? So they are on the battleground themselves also, right? So this is, we'll be talking about this in greater length, but this is, the basic idea as far as the role of gods is concerned. This is Iliad by Homer that we are looking at. Okay, I've already explained some of these questions. Achilles' mother foretold him as what happens if he stays at home. Achilles knew his anger makes him inhuman, and still he chose to fight. Why so? He chose to fight for his own glory, right? So for the Greeks, glory, kleos, as I mentioned, eternal fame after their death, also eternal fame that they earn, is the ultimate objective of life, right? So that is why Achilles fights the war despite knowing that, he will die, and despite knowing that, what is the fate of his, what is his fate after he fights the battle. But he does it basically for earning glory, earning kleos, right? That is why he participates in the war, despite knowing his own flaws, despite knowing, his fate. About the exams, guys, we cannot say right now what happens, until the time you have your exams, whether they'll be online or offline. I cannot say that right now. That would depend on the circumstances, and that would be completely the decision of the university and probably, the higher authorities. So I cannot really comment on that right now. Yeah, the movie is very, very different. So in the movie Troy, you do not see any influence of the gods, right? The gods are not there in the movie. And then, some of the instances, the way it projects is also different. So the movie is understood as an adaptation, right? So you would have heard that some stories, even for the films that you would have watched, right, they are based on a true story. What does that mean? That if they're based on the true story, they're not exactly the true story. They just pick up events, circumstances from situations from the story, and they then take their own creative liberty, their own creative license, and then make a film out of it, right? So that is what has happened with Iliad also. The movie Troy is an adaptation of Iliad. It is not really a word by word or a chapter by chapter, portrayal or representation of the book as well. Okay, so I think I've kind of answered most of these questions here. Homer's sympathy for his people and soldiers were known to everybody. The statement of Zeus, there is nothing alive more agonized than man, how it shows his fear. Um, so there is nothing alive more agonized than man. Um, okay, so let me talk about this life and death question that you were raising earlier. Life and death, for gods, they are the immortals, right? They cannot really die. So for them, when we read about this, when we read about the fights, the quarrels that the gods have, they seem very trivial, right? Against the kind of tragic um, gravity, tragic severity that you find as far as the mortals are concerned. Because for the mortals, it is going to be a matter of life and death. For the gods, since they cannot die, uh, it all becomes like a trivial kind of quarrel that they're indulging themselves in. It becomes a matter of favoritism. It becomes a matter of ego. Becomes a matter of love or affection, ego, favoritism, jealousy. These are the kind of things that they're fighting about. For the men, because it is a matter of life or death, right? It becomes big. It becomes huge. It becomes tragic, right? So the fact of immortality uh, is why for Zeus, he says that there is nothing more agonized than man, because he uh, delves into this whole agony of experience of life, right? The difficulties that life posits. That is man's cup of tea, right? That is not for gods. Gods hold immense power, no matter how, the or what forms the basis of their quarrels. They have immense power. They have the right to control situations, right? And when Homer talks of the gods, he talks about them with utmost respect, right? Despite the kind of behaviors they show. So for them, there is no agony as such of experience of this kind of bereavement, this kind of separation, this tragic separation from family, or this tragic separation, or feeling that loss of losing somebody who's close to you, or feeling that fear of death, or probably surpassing that fear of death when you choose to fight. All of those are extremely agonizing experiences that only humans can feel and not the immortals, because for them death does not exist, right? So that is why we can probably talk about that statement, that Homer sympathizes with the humans, right? With the soldiers, because they are fighting a battle which can result into death and losses for them. Uh, it is not the same case for the gods. It is not the same for Zeus. And for Zeus, he is compassionate in that sense, because he understands that for the humans it is such a big deal, which is not the same for the immortals, right? So the immortals can choose, to mess up things on the basis of whatever they want, right? On the basis of their jealousy, on the basis of their love, their favoritism, their biases, but that is not possible for men. And of course, the gods know things, right? They are aware of the prophecies, they're aware of all the oracles, they know the fate of these mortals, but the mortals themselves may or may not be aware of their fate, right? Or they do not know what their fate. What happens in the Iliad, or what happens as a part of the Iliad, we know what is going to happen, right? But when, how, all of that is not given to us. So even if you think about, our experience as humans, it is going to be more agonizing because we cannot really predict what is going to happen to us and when, right? Than somebody probably who knows, who's mentally prepared for what is to come to them. Yeah, Achilles is the protagonist. Homer's identification or character, sorry, I did not really get that question. No, we do not have the concept of rasa in the European literature or in the Iliad, right? Rasa is something very, very specific to Indian ethos. Why? Because, even in the tragedies, for example, when you're reading Kalidasa's Abhijnana Shakuntalam, right, it is a tragic story of sorts, right? That the lovers separate, they undergo great perils, and finally they meet. But, it highlights the pathos of that love, right? And it finally ends in a happy ending. Okay, so if you know the original story in the Mahabharata regarding Shakuntala, that is not the happy ending that we see, right? With the Mahabharata is supposed to be as it is, right? History as it was, itihasa as it was, right? While when we talk about the Iliad, right, it is not really a representation or a truthful representation of history. One thing is that. Another thing is that the concept of rasa is, something to do with the impact on the readers. It is an aesthetic theory, right? In terms of the fact that what kind of an audience reaction are you aiming at? For the Greeks, for the oral poetic tradition, as far as the Greeks is concerned, rasa is not their, their prerogative, right? They are not writing literature for the entertainment of people, right? So probably, rasa is, as we said, that, when you read Bharata's theory as well in the Natya Shastra, rasa is about, relishing something, right? So relishing the flavors of life is what rasa is about. But for, the Iliad, it is not the same. It is about providing sources of knowledge. It is about, talking about incidents that happened. So since the worldviews, the ethos of the two worlds are completely different, therefore I would not say that the concept of rasa can be held, to be true to the Iliad. How Achilles immortalized his name, right? So I think that is clear from the kind of, fact that uh, Homer himself chooses to write about Achilles, right? As we said that in the 13th century, the events of the war happened, and Homer is writing about it 5 centuries later in the 8th century BC, right? So, of course, you can understand that Achilles' name, his glory has, eternalized. It is what has stayed on the Greek mind. Therefore, he is immortalized by earning that glory, by fighting that war. If Achilles chose to withdraw from the army, never to fight a war, he would not be there in terms of any poetic tradition or any debates, any questions. If Rasa and Bhav is not there, then how the protagonist connects with people? Okay, so this is a question about reception, really, right? So, you know, if I put it very, very simply, probably the concepts, of Bhav, Ras are specific to Indian ethos, right? But in terms of how we relate, when we will come to Plato and Aristotle, and I'll be talking about Aristotle with you, we'll have a class on Plato and Aristotle, right? Then we'll be talking about, what are the objectives of each of the genres, right? Or what are the objectives of tragedy? What are the objectives of comedy? What are the objectives of epic? So, of course, when you're reading a narrative, when you're listening to any story at all, you connect to, you connect to the characters, you connect to that, the ethos in the story. But it does not necessarily happen in the aesthetic settings of the bhava and the rasa. So what is rasa and bhav supposed to do? They have to actually manufacture that emotion in terms of portraying or setting the technique so that that emotion is evoked, right? So the technique has to be such. Now for the Greeks, it is different, right? And for the Indians, it is different because their worldviews also differ. So of course there is character identification, or we learn from the story. For example, about tragedy, Aristotle says that a tragedy is supposed to arouse pity and fear in people, in the reader, in the audience, so that such negative emotions are purged. They're released from the reader or the audience watching the play. But what does that mean? It means that, this is uh, the techniques. He would also talk about what kind of an epic hero should it be like, what kind of a tragic hero should it be like. But the techniques of the bhava and rasa function in a different way than the techniques of the Greek poetic tradition, right? So that is, aestheticism is there, but the ways of functioning are different. So the connection is also there. But what is the aim of that connection? How the techniques of working out that connection are woven into the text, that is going to be different in both the Indian tradition and in the Western tradition. Okay, class, I think, uh, I have probably taken about 30 minutes for your doubts, and more than 30 minutes for doubts, and most of these have been taken up. If there are any specific queries that are left, since we are left about 2 minutes of the class anyway, so I don't think we can really go into the summary of the book, but then I can probably do that. Of course, the summary, the PPT I'll be able to upload, but I cannot really give you the recordings of the class. That is not under my access. But I suppose that your recordings would be available while you log in from your dashboard. They take some time to upload, so they might not be immediately available there. And for people who have joined in late, in terms of the syllabus also, please please go to your SOL website, and you'll be finding the syllabus of your first term there. You'll also be finding your course material, your study material, and you can access those. In terms of the book, I've already told you that the prescribed edition is by E.V. Review, who's the translator. The book is called Iliad, and the author is Homer. So you can also probably Google a copy of the book if you cannot really go to the market right now and find a copy, and you want to read the book, then you can probably refer to some other translation meanwhile, and then get hold of that prescribed translation later. Okay, as far as your WhatsApp group queries are concerned, I cannot be answering that. The admin is there, and if you've given your numbers, then probably they'll be able to add you up in due course of time. Okay. In the next class, of course, we'll be talking about the summary of the book. So I'll request you all to probably go through a summary from the study material that is uploaded on the SOL website, and we can go through that summary. We'll also be discussing that in the book, and then finally, after we go through the summaries, we'll be moving on to the themes, the important questions, the motives, and the ideas and the treatment of gods, the characterization and everything. But I think you'll get a fair idea when we, uh, read the summary as well. Okay, so I hope this class has given you some sort of familiarity with Greek ethics, with the Greek epic, and some sort of an insight into the Iliad as well. We'll continue with our next class when we talk about, the summary of the book per se. There are 24 books. There is a lot to do. It is an epic, not easily finished in about 6 hours of classes. So please contribute, please, read up so that you have very specific questions rather than, uh, something long. I understand that you do not have much time, so which is why I'm asking you to go through your prescribed SOL material so that you can have an idea, because of course I do not expect you to be finishing up the entire epic in a day, right? Because we have a class on Monday, so I'll see you next on 25th of January, the same time. And until then, you can probably look at your material and go through your classes. If there is any other specific doubt that you want me to answer, I can take it up in the last minute, and then we can wind up with the class for today. Thank you guys, and I hope I was I have made things sort of clear to you, and I hope we'll be more clear with things as we move on with our classes. Okay, so I will be ending the class now, and we've run out of time, and we'll be taking up the summary in the next class. Thank you.